Sorry for the slight delay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a lovely afternoon here in Dublin. I hope it's nice where you are. You're very welcome. My name is William Bosang. I'm head of the Further Education, Training and Skills Policy in the Department of Further and Higher Education. You're very welcome to this afternoon's webinar, and one that I hope that you're looking forward to and get benefit from, where we're going to present in more detail than we have before the work that's been carried out in the department over the last couple of months in developing a policy platform for what we're describing as progressing a unified tertiary system. And I'm sure many, if not all of you, have seen the policy platform paper and have seen the ministerial press release. So this afternoon provides an opportunity to just shed more light and take stock with you of the project and its objectives. So the running order for this afternoon is, first of all, we're delighted that we have the Minister Simon Harris, with us this afternoon to welcome you to the webinar, but also to give his perspective on the importance of this policy in terms of the broader mandate of his department. That'll be followed with some further remarks from myself, as I just set the context for the presentation that we're having this afternoon from my colleague, Stephanie Thompson, who will work you through a slideshow in sort of describing the key elements, key objectives, and the key requirements of moving the direction of that unified tertiary system. Hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end involving myself and the team. So on that basis, I'll welcome the Minister and hand over to him to give his opening remarks and get us underway this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William, and thank you to everybody for joining us online. It's good to at least virtually see you here, and I really appreciate you being here. I think the fact that there are so many people on this call and so many organizations represented really does give us an indication and a sense of the scope of the project that we're embarking on, the scope of the policy that we now intend to implement. And this policy is grounded in the concept of Ireland needing a unified tertiary education system. I think it also does more than that. I think it's an acknowledgement of the really good engagement and commitment from right across the sector, from state agencies, from non-governmental organizations, community organizations, from further ed, from higher ed, to assisting my department in trying to drive forward a mission of reform and progress for third level education in Ireland. I do feel that I have the unique opportunity and indeed responsibility as our country's first Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science to try and progress a new vision for the sector. And we've been working very hard in our department on this for the last couple of years. I was delighted last month on the 24th of May to bring to government our policy vision, and to have that policy vision endorsed by the government and to have it published. So there is now a clarity. The government of Ireland wants to see a unified tertiary education system. But maybe the more interesting question is, what do we mean when we talk about a unified tertiary education system? And before I answer that, let me tell you that I answer it in the context of strongly believing that we already have a strong and well-performing sector in this country. We have a strong further education sector, higher education sector, an apprenticeship model that is strengthening by the day, solid research and innovation foundations. We have a sector that has performed admirably in maintaining continuity in light of so many challenges, including most obviously the pandemic. And we have a sector that continues to serve and support its academic, non-academic research and wider communities. But we can't in any way be complacent or arrogant or dismissive of the need for change, because we have to do more. And we have to recognize that there are now changing needs and changing demands of students, learners, staff, researchers, industry, the economy, wider society, and crucially our citizens. Our citizens are going to expect us to deliver third level education in a different way. They're not going to have any interest or tolerance for silos. They're going to want a system that is learner-centered, that is flexible and agile, and that can work for them in the many different ways they will live and work into the future. I do think all of this is happening against a positive background, because it's happening against a background of having agreed funding and a reform framework for higher education. The policy Funding the Future explicitly recognizes the creation of a unified, balanced and integrated knowledge and skills system as a key priority. So while the government has quite rightly, and one could argue belatedly, agreed to properly fund and resource higher education in Ireland, It does so wanting that to be a lever for a conversation about reform and a conversation about a unified, balanced, integrated skills system in Ireland. There are going to be important synergies and opportunities for collaboration between that piece of funding work and the work in relation to this policy that we're here to discuss today. I've been visiting schools right across the country. I think I've been in more than 60 schools, secondary schools, since the start of this year. I've been in education and training boards in almost every county in Ireland. And I see a system that does work for many. There's no doubt about that. But I also see a system that doesn't work for all, and perhaps the way that it could. And I think it is important to reflect on that. I think the pressure that we're putting on young people in this country is immense. I think the narrow focus that we're putting on what happens after your leaving cert is out of kilter with many other countries. I think the fact that you could have two brilliant students sitting side by side in a classroom, both desperately wanting to be nurses, one does better in the leaving cert than the other, but the other would actually make a better nurse. We can't have such a rigidity to how we assess and how we support the progression of citizens in fulfilling their dreams. We've also got to recognize when we talk about students and learners, not everybody's a school leaver. Not everybody's 18 or 19 and looking to pack their bags and head to university for 4 years. Many people will need to today, and much more so into the future, will need to access our education system whilst being perhaps a carer, whilst perhaps being a parent, whilst perhaps being someone caring for their parents, whilst perhaps holding down a full-time job and trying to pay a mortgage. And mature students, as we now call them, but citizens interacting with the education system are going to need to do so in a much more flexible way. And I think Tara Farrell is on the call here from Longford Women's Link. And I saw firsthand how you're doing that in Longford Women's Link. And there's other examples of it across the country. But I don't want to be pointed to examples of it. I want this to be embedded, that we actually have an education system that is flexible, no matter what age, what gender, what your background, what your parents did before you, where you live in Ireland, that we can make sure you can dip in and out of education and obtain the piece of skill, the qualification that you need to get you to where you want to get to in your work life and indeed in your personal life, because lifelong learning is going to really become the cornerstone of our education system, and I believe our economic and social well-being into the future. I also just want to say this: we should never, ever, ever feel threatened about a unified tertiary sector, because if anyone looks at the demographics, they're only going in one direction. We're going to see a massive increase in the number of students of all ages looking to access the education system. We're going to see the demographic bulge, if you like, move from second level to third level, just like it moved from primary to secondary level. And it's about making sure the student, the learner, can get to the right place at the right time that works for them. So put bluntly, there will be more students than any one part of the sector can accommodate. Therefore, it makes so much sense for all of us to work in that unified sense. So what this is about is creating a more unified approach across tertiary education, across research, one that can grow equality, diversity, and inclusion across the system, one that can enable our system to adapt, to can create more unified regional systems, and I note the existence of the technological universities there, and one that can provide for the skills, knowledge, and talents of individuals, our economy, and our society. I also think it's so important that we continue to remind ourselves, as I referenced already, about the more diverse and accessible approaches to learning that are going to be needed. This is so, so important. I think people have seen during COVID how education can be provided in different ways. And whilst it caused huge difficulty for some people, it actually provided an opportunity for others who were able to learn in remote ways, perhaps for the first time ever. So at the heart of this policy that you're going to hear about from my colleagues now is an ambition, and it's an ambition to ensure that everyone has a pathway and that any barrier to progression is removed. In this way, I envisage a system whereby, irrespective of whether a learner enters into further or higher education or into a research career, they're in a single system. They're in a system that responds to their individual talents, ambitions, and motivations. And crucially, they're in a system where they cannot put a foot wrong. The system should be designed in such a way that the learner can never put a foot wrong, not in a way where the learner is constantly worried that if they go this way or that way, they've gone the wrong way. The pace of change is something I know everyone on this call is conscious of. The pace of change in our environment, in our society, in our economy, it's accelerating, and it's accelerating every day. And it's going to require a swift and agile response. I really believe that a whole of tertiary system approach, which values collaboration, sharing of knowledge and expertise, and capitalize on the strengths of the system and develop that swiftness and that agility to address the challenges of today, tomorrow, and into the future. We have sectors and a sector with lots of individual strengths. If we can bring them together there's huge untapped potential to arrive at innovative solutions to a range of sustainability challenges, be that climate, housing, health, social care. I believe a unified system has a major role to play in strengthening and developing our regions, making sure we actually see more balanced regional development in this country. Shared infrastructure, the development of strong regional partnerships between ETBs, universities, technological universities, these will be fundamental to meeting the needs of local communities, society, and the economy. So recognizing all these benefits, recognizing that we cannot stand still, my department has been working on the development of this policy vision to bring the complementary strands of tertiary education and research closer together. I want to acknowledge and thank my department for what has been extensive engagement within the department, extensive engagement within our agencies in trying to identify actions that will support and progress a more unified system and ensuring that they're meaningful and relevant. But I also want to assure you today, and the purpose of today, is that engagement doesn't stop there. While we've talked to ourselves a lot over the last while about this policy, about this vision, we want to talk to you, and we want to use your expertise, your knowledge, and get your input. We want to have as broad a conversation as possible with the people of Ireland so that we can have a true mandate to deliver on these reforms. And to that end, my department has now commenced an open consultation process, a process in which all are welcome to provide their views, their observations, their insights. And I'd encourage and ask you to spread the word about that. People are central to all we do, so the more voices we hear as part of the process, the more rich and valuable and democratized, if you like, the policy will be. But today's webinar is also part of a wider engagement because we're trying to give the opportunity to key stakeholders to hear greater detail on the vision, to answer any questions you may have, and to consider and ask you to consider how you can support the realization of the vision. So I really look forward to hearing the output of today's seminar. I look forward to traveling this reform road together with you as we try to develop the vision and turn it into a reality. I want to thank you all again for your commitment to this project. I'm really excited about where it can bring us and where it can help get our citizens to in the future. And I look forward to working with you on this. And I'll hand back to William.
Thank you, Minister. And I think that theme that the Minister mentioned of not putting a foot wrong, that's the kind of system, tertiary system, that we want to put in place with your help, with your support, and working closely with you. Minister can't stay with us this afternoon, reflecting pressure in ministerial business, but it's, I think, really valuable for us, for everyone on the call, to get such a strong sense of ministerial leadership and the government support for this important initiative. You know, the objective of a more unified tertiary system, as we look at the department, it's in many ways a proof of concept for the establishment of a single department with responsibility for FET, HE, research and innovation, as well, of course, for lifelong learning, which the Minister properly described as a sort of cornerstone to tertiary education, and an element that obviously didn't make it into the department's name. As I said at the start, anyway, you're all very welcome to this afternoon's briefing, and we really appreciate you giving your time to come in to listen to and learn more about what underlies the policy platform that the Minister launched at the end of May, having brought to government, and he has just kind of introduced at the top of our webinar this morning. But more than that, we hope that your participation and engagement this afternoon is the first of many as we collectively start to navigate through the ambitious and very important objectives of the policy platform that you will be hearing about more this afternoon from Stephanie Thompson. I would like to reiterate what the Minister has already said about the journey we are traveling. You know, the engagement is starting here. Right from the beginning of developing the platform, our intention has been to lay the foundations for FET, for HE, for research and innovation, to work with us, for those systems to work with us, to lead, steer and guide the further evolution, development and delivery of the platform's objectives. The approach we're adopting is intended to be quite different to the sort of maybe more conventional or traditional approach, where a strategy or policy framework is delivered by a department, by our department, fully developed, or if I even dare use the phrase, presented as oven ready for delivery through a fully articulated and final set of actions. That's not what we are. That's not where we are with this policy. I think it's really important to say that. We're certainly not envisaging a top-down approach. What we want to do is work with the different elements of the tertiary system to coordinate, cohere, and systematize a direction of travel which, as the Minister said, is already well evidenced and strongly demonstrated in many ways and in many places within the current system, but it's not mainstream. Last Friday, I participated in one of the workshops at the OECD Local Development Forum in Cork. Several of you, or some of you might have been involved yourselves. What was really striking to me from the dialogue and the discussion at the workshop, and it represented people from right across the higher and further education research system in Ireland and internationally, the extent to which that kind of tertiary perspective that's captured in the policy platform is embodied in, thinking across the board on how best to respond to the broader economic and societal challenges, which the HE, FET, and R&I sectors all have a central role in resolving. At the OECD forum, there was a discussion of the 3Ds, as they were termed: digitization, decarbonisation, demographic developments, and the sort of fundamental implications they have for the workforce, for society, for our lives, and for the education system. And arising from the discussions, a really consistent theme that emerged at the forum was the need for a whole system approach, where we equip our students and learners, our workers and businesses, our citizens and communities with the capacity and capability to learn, work, and live successfully in that 3D world. So the policy platform that we're talking to you about this afternoon is strongly underpinned by that type of analysis. And its success and effectiveness will depend on a process of co-creation with the different aspects of our current system as we work together, as we participate in designing a more unified tertiary system. Minister mentioned in his remarks the pandemic, and we all saw through the COVID experience the energy, commitment, innovation, and indeed imagination that what could be realized across all dimensions of higher, further, and continuing education and training, which were mobilized around the shared objective of meeting the needs of students and learners at that very difficult time. And I think it's fair to say that in very many ways that COVID experience has shifted our perspectives, our mindsets, and indeed our preconceptions regarding the pace of potential change and the degree of agility and responsiveness that's there in our post-compulsory education system. I mean, from my own perspective, from the vantage point of the COVID steering group in the department, in which all sectoral stakeholders were represented, and hearing about and seeing all the heavy lifting carried out through the crisis, the resilience and resourcefulness that was sort of deep and wide across every higher and further education institution and setting was really critical to dealing with the challenges at that time. And it won't surprise, I'm sure, anyone to hear that that experience confirmed to me that no one has all the answers or indeed all the questions. The methodology that we used during COVID was to cast the net as widely as possible to solve problems in drawing on the experience and expertise of all stakeholders, because we learned by discussing challenges widely, there's a much fuller understanding of their complexity and the interdependent nature of the solutions that are necessary. And of course, as we've all seen in our work in different contexts, as issues are more widely understood, discussed and owned, there's more scope for collaboration and positive behavioural change. So creating shared understanding about any policy challenge, and by developing a shared commitment to possible solutions, it means that stakeholders understand each other's positions well enough to have intelligent dialogue about the different interpretations of the challenge, and then exercise their collective intelligence in solving those problems. So that's precisely the approach that we hope will inform discussions on how we move forward with you on the unified tertiary system. And I think it's fair to say, we won't achieve the full set of opportunities that the policy platform promises for students and learners unless we adopt that approach. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Stephanie Thompson, who will update you in more detail on the policy platform. And in parallel to that, I think at this stage, if you want to start feeding in questions that we'll try to pick up on after Stephanie's presentation, that would be a good thing to do at this stage. So Stephanie, if you want to come in at this stage.
Thank you, William. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for being here this Monday afternoon, this sunny Monday afternoon. Just by way of a quick introduction, my name is Stephanie Thompson and I work as part of the strategic policy team here within the department. Our mandate is to support and assist the development of strategic policy right across the department. And as part of that mandate, we have been working on the development of this key policy to progress a more unified tertiary education and research system. So I see we're doing quite well in terms of timings, and I definitely don't want to be the one to buck that trend. So without any further ado, I'll just attempt to share my screen now and we will get started. So today we are very happy to have the opportunity to set out to you as key stakeholders in the system, the detail of the department's policy vision to progress a unified tertiary education and research system. This, in my own opinion, is a really key milestone in the process because you are the people out in the system, the very system that we're working to strengthen. And as key stakeholders, your support and your contribution to the development of this policy would be key to making it a reality. As the Minister and William have both touched upon, Ireland has a highly regarded tertiary education and research system with an outstanding track record, and it has performed exceptionally well during the challenging past 2 years. However, there is scope now to improve upon this strong performance and to advance the sustainability of the system's responses to the changing needs of students, of learners, of industry, and of wider society. That scope for change is evident in 3 areas. Firstly, the Programme for Government sets out an ambition to create a world-class education system through building stronger connections within the system by viewing education as an holistic and lifelong pursuit, and for the system to be as inclusive as it can be. And the Programme for Government recognises the potential for the tertiary education and research sector to be exemplars not only regionally and nationally, but also internationally. The creation of our new department, the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science in June 2020, brought together for the first time the strands of the sector under the one roof, so to speak, providing a platform and a central focus needed to promote, reform and develop the policy, funding and governance of the sector. The department's statement of strategy, launched in early 2021, set out our overarching mission to develop Ireland's future higher and research systems to support people in reaching their full potential and to create value, prosperity and a cohesive, sustainable and vibrant society. The strategic goals underpinning the achievement of that mission, which include the development of talent and skills, support learning for all, promote research, knowledge and innovation to succeed on the world stage, to ensure good governance, to enhance quality, and to ensure a department fit for purpose, are all to varying degrees fundamentally aligned with and can be progressed through a more unified tertiary education and research system. Up to this point, the diverse elements of tertiary education, research and innovation have for the most part been organised and operated in separate ways. While the successes of the individual constituent elements of the system are evident, their operation and evolution in separate spheres has to some degree impacted on more strategic integrated thinking and actions across the system in its entirety. We can all acknowledge here today that the country is facing a wave of unprecedented change, which is affecting society in many different ways and across many different facets. Across the digital sphere, climate action, skills shortage in key areas, and predictions that Ireland will experience significant demographic changes in the next 30 years. And changes such as these require a system that is adaptable, that's resilient, and that's prepared to respond to these changes, and which can play a stronger role in building greater sustainability, environmental, economic, and societal. Viewed holistically, these drivers of change provided very rich ground for the development of a more unified tertiary education system. In addition to these drivers of change, there exists a strong policy context to support this work. Since its establishment, the department has certainly hit the ground running, and there have been many policy developments, projects, strategies, initiatives rolled out across the sector, which speak to the shared commitment of the department and of the Minister, and indeed of all stakeholders right across the sector to develop, progress and reform the system. You'll see a number of these policies represented on screen, and many of you here today will have been closely involved in their development and their implementation. And as you see there, they include the OECD Skills Project, the Capital Programme, the Action Plan for Apprenticeships, as well as the recently launched R&I strategy, Impact 2030, and Funding the Future. These policies, strategies, and initiatives support the vision of a more unified system through their advancement of their respective goals and objectives. And indeed, many have begun to absorb the vision, the objectives, and the actions towards the progression of a more unified system. For example, Impact 2030, which is Ireland's research and innovation strategy, recognises the strong embeddedness of research in our higher education system and the value of integrating PhET in our knowledge and research ecosystems. Similarly, the Funding and Reform Framework for Higher Education, Funding the Future, agreed by government on the 3rd of May this year, also recognises the need for the creation of a unified, a balanced and an integrated knowledge and skills system as a key priority to enable a coherent and comprehensive range of learning opportunities. Factoring in the scope for change externally, the changing environment, the new department strategic goals and the wider policy context, we've identified 5 objectives which we are confident this policy will achieve. These objectives are, and we'll just start on the left-hand side there, learning and development. So at the centre of the system are the motivations and the ambitions of individual learners, students and researchers. A diverse set of clearer educational and developmental opportunities within a unified, well-joined up system improves the likelihood that individuals will find options that align well with their own personal motivations and ambitions. Over time, a more unified system can expand and lengthen pathways to enable the consolidation of initial steps and scaffold higher and wider levels of learning and development, including easing progress to research specialisation. Inclusion. Here we aim to develop more inclusive cultures and the development of a more integrated tertiary education system, providing more diverse and better aligned learning and development opportunities and creating more extensive pathways throughout the system directly impacts on the achievement of the department's strategic goal to support learning for all. A more unified system can streamline progress and ensure the removal of unnecessary hierarchies, distinctions and barriers, and open up opportunities so that individuals are enabled to participate and derive the maximum benefit from their education and their skills development and indeed their research interests. Adapting to change. As I've already mentioned, there are significant trends that will shape and profoundly change our society over the coming years. A strong, unified further and higher education, research and innovation system is more capable of being agile and responsive and integral, in fact, to diminishing the challenges and making most of the opportunities that they present. These trends also in turn call for policy coherence and a deepening of collaboration as advocated for in our statement of strategy, and we can achieve this through this policy. Regional rebalancing. A more joined up education, training and research system regionally is conducive to creating a more coherent response to the regional rebalancing objective of Project Ireland 2040 and the associated regional, spatial and economic strategies, which seek to ensure that all parts of Ireland achieve their full potential. These seek to disrupt the current spatial patterns of population growth in order to promote a more balanced development across Ireland's regions and include specific targets for population and employment growth in cities and regions. The presence of higher and further education providers is evident right across the country, with the further education system in particular hosting a footprint in every county across Ireland. A more unified tertiary education system could capitalise on this footprint to assist in necessary regional rebalancing as envisaged under Project 2040. And skills and talent. This objective highlights the goal of the department to enable personal growth, to develop talents and to promote lifelong learning, to promote and champion closer alignment and integration of the system in order to facilitate a wider range of transition points. We're seeking to enable diverse and progressive pathways across and between the system in order to facilitate individuals to engage in employment and therefore contribute in a meaningful way to wider society. A strengthening of talent and skills objectives across a more coherent system and aligning these more closely to research and innovation not only supports the department's desire for greater development of talent and skills, but also the national strategy for a more advanced knowledge-based economy. The development of a more unified tertiary system will place a necessary strategic focus on ensuring that the system works for students, for learners, and for researchers, equipping them with the necessary skills and talent, not only to secure employment in the current and future economy, but to be appropriately equipped to create their own opportunities for employment. Education, as we know, is for all in society, and it has to be seen as a lifelong pursuit. And as diverse as our population is, so too are the nature of our areas of interest and our ambitions and the extent of our talent and skills to develop them. Moving towards a more complementary and diverse unified system of lifelong learning options is the best way in which we can scaffold and meet the diverse ambitions and talents of students, learners, and researchers throughout their lifetimes. And so moving on, having identified the objectives, the work then began within the department to develop the nuts and bolts of the policy in terms of the outcomes we needed to see and the actions to make them a reality. Recognizing the interrelatedness between the objectives of this policy and the wider policy work of the department, our approach to the initial development of the policy was centered on extensive engagement with colleagues right across the department, with a view to building upon existing work streams that are being progressed by various areas and agencies, and indeed across the system. And in doing so, we wanted to focus on the progression of a number of discrete actions that are dispersed, but at the same time are coordinated across the department and beyond. And at the heart of this approach is collaboration. Collaboration with and between teams of the department, collaboration with our agencies, and collaboration with stakeholders more broadly. And as we move forward, we want to continue this approach and to build upon it to foster active engagement with the sector and with you stakeholders. And we want to ensure that space and scope is provided to facilitate this engagement. So on this next slide, you can see how this approach is translated into a sequence of work packages. We started out at the beginning of this year by initiating a broad conversation with colleagues in the various areas of the department. The purpose of the engagement was to socialise the vision of a unified tertiary system, but also to initiate conversations with colleagues so that we could document the actions already in progress that aligned with the 5 policy objectives, and to encourage colleagues to subsequently engage with their respective agencies as key collaborators, to identify further actions in progress that aligned with the vision, or to identify new actions coming out in existing processes which would support a more unified approach. This open dialogue was fundamental in building the vision, as through this work, we were able to identify strong policy outcomes and the actions needed to realise those outcomes and set them out clearly in a policy platform paper and a spotlight actions for 2022, both of which I'll elaborate further on. The Minister has advocated strongly for many of the objectives that we want to achieve through this policy, and his contribution and his engagement with our team on this work has been key to ensuring that it's relevant as well as being impactful. On the 24th of May, the Minister brought a memo to government setting out his ambition and objective to progress a unified tertiary education system and his intention to embark on a process of stakeholder consultation. And this was subsequently affirmed by government colleagues. Following this, the department launched a public consultation which will happen in 2 phases. The first phase has now commenced with the opening of an online consultation platform where any individual or group can make a submission in response to a small number of open-ended questions to share their thoughts, their insights, and indeed their observations on the policy vision. The second phase will take place through a series of targeted stakeholder engagements and dialogue, building on the information gathered in the first phase. We want to develop this policy in an iterative and dynamic way, and so we remain committed to continue to developing it through active engagement with our colleagues, with agencies, and with all stakeholders. This will be complemented by an annual publication of spotlight actions for subsequent years, which will also highlight progress made. We're also working with our evidence for policy colleagues here within the department to build an evidence base, which will support and underpin this work. In addition, we've recently presented the policy vision to the members of the Funding the Future working group, which has been tasked with making recommendations which support the creation of a more unified tertiary education system in recognition of the importance of a unified, balanced and integrated knowledge and skills system as a key priority. And we look forward to working with the group to achieve this. In terms of an end goal, this co-creative approach, which we've championed throughout the process, will ultimately enable stakeholders to collaborate with other sectors and with the department to drive the co-creation of a strategy for tertiary education as provided for in the HEA Bill 2022. The policy platform paper is the culmination of our work, and it outlines the Minister's commitment to progress the development of a more unified tertiary system capable of meeting the diverse needs of all learners throughout their lifelong pursuit for knowledge and skills, more closely aligning research and innovation to higher and further education and training, and strategically positioning the system to better address the future knowledge and skill needs of our learners and researchers, our economy, and indeed our society. The paper draws together the components of Ireland's further education and training, higher education, research and innovation sectors, and in the context of Programme for Government commitments, it frames a vision for a more unified system and outlines a series of overarching objectives that we expect to achieve through the development of this policy, and the impacts of the changes that these outcomes will bring about. These objectives will be arrived at through the achievement of a wide range of complementary outcomes, each underpinned by a range of actions. A spotlight focus on the actions that are commencing in 2022 is included in the platform. And in that context, the overarching purpose of this policy platform is to initiate an open consultation and an engagement process with sectors and stakeholders to co-create that strategy. And so while the platform paper tells the story, the people also want to see the action we're taking. Therefore, as I mentioned, the paper also contains a spotlight focus on the actions that are commencing in 2022, which highlight the depth and indeed the breadth of ways in which this policy vision will translate into reality and how it will have a real meaningful impact which will be felt right across the system. The spotlight focuses on actions which commence in 2022 and which will show the meaningful progress in the development of this more unified system. It's intended that the focus on these actions, led out initially by the department and its agencies, will stimulate the identification and progression of sector-led actions which similarly support the vision. Each year, the department intends to publish a spotlight on actions for subsequent years, and over time, as the vision and the actions take hold, we expect the proportion of actions in the spotlight that are led by sectors and stakeholders to grow. So in supporting and progressing the actions contained in the 2022 spotlight, we expect the impact of these actions to be seen in the realization of the outcomes shown in the graphic here in front of you. These are specifically in the development of complementary learning and research programs, a comprehensive network of links and pathways, and the development of lifelong and life-wide learning and research systems. And so I come to what I think is probably the most important part of this presentation, indeed, probably from my perspective, and that's what part do we need you to play in developing this policy further to increase the depth and breadth of its reach and impact and to ensure it embeds into the system. Having outlined to you today what it is we're trying to achieve with this vision, we need you to lead and join in this vision of a more unified system and become advocates for its development within your own spheres, to take ownership of the various actions and further their progression, which will ensure that meaningful impacts will be seen and felt, and to contribute to, inform and deepen those actions and responses to support our ambition to progress a more unified tertiary system. We're also asking you to collaborate with colleagues within your organisations and groups to ensure that your work within the existing policies, strategies and initiatives set out here and referred to earlier reflect a more unified approach. And finally, to engage with the department to identify additional actions that can assist in progressing the vision. And just as an aside, while I was preparing for this afternoon's presentation, my son asked me, what's this all about? And I tried to explain what I was doing as simply as I could to a young man whose life revolves around Roblox and GAA, to which he responded, oh, so it's kind of like when you tell us that teamwork makes the dream work. And I suppose without sounding too casual or too blithe about it, it really is. And it's only through collaborating and engaging and working together that we can achieve our common objectives. And this has been the benchmark by which we have progressed the vision to this point, and it's how we intend to progress it with your support and your assistance as we move forward. On that note, and before I finish, it would be remiss of me not to take the opportunity to promote our online consultation, which I referred to earlier, which is currently live at www.gov.ie Unified System. The closing date for contributions is the 29th of July. And I would encourage you all to make a contribution and to encourage your organisations, your colleagues, and perhaps friends and family to do the same. The more voices we hear and the more contributions we can reflect as part of this process, the more valuable, rich, and indeed meaningful the end result will be. So at this point, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I hope I haven't gone too far over. Thank you for your attention. I hope that I've been able to add a little bit to your knowledge and to your understanding of this important piece of work, and most importantly, the key role that you have in progressing its development. So I understand we will have an opportunity to answer any questions you may have. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment and take a breath and a drink of water, and I'll hand you back to William. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Thanks for bringing us through the policy platform in the presentation. And I see that the questions are beginning to build up a bit. So if we just ask, sorry, I'm just going to introduce my colleague, Orla Lynch, who is joining us on the virtual panel, I suppose, to address the questions that you may wish to pose for us this afternoon. So the first question we have, and we have till about 3:30, so happy for people to start feeding in questions, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. First one we have is from Ivan O'Brien. It's a really important one, and it's one certainly we've agonized over as we've developed the policy. And Ivan is asking us, or suggesting that it would be helpful to clarify or simplify language surrounding this initiative. And of course, as civil servants, we can often fall short. We can often be subject to excessive use of jargon. But Ivan's suggestion is that we make the intent clear and the outcomes tangible, and unified might be open to misinterpretation. And she asked the question, what will a successful outcome for DFARS be? I might ask Orla to come in on that before she does, just to make the point that we're very concerned to ensure that the unified tertiary team isn't seen as suggesting that we should have a homogeneous system. It's a diverse system. It's a system that's broad, wide, and deep, that is inherent to the strength of post-compulsory education in Ireland. So I think it's an important question to sort of pick up maybe at the outset. So I'll hand over to Orla on that basis.
Thanks, William. And it's my experience of these kind of things is that you usually almost answered the question in handing it over. In terms of, I guess, to address your specific question, we take on board the feedback around clarifying and simplifying language, and we'll certainly look at that. In terms of a successful outcome, I suppose at the most broad level, it's that this starts to look and feel more like a single system. If you unpick that a little bit, what do we mean? We mean that the sectors that are in the system at present work together in more complementary ways than they do now. So it's not, as William says, to homogenize. It's not a one size fits all. It's to try and get the sectors that make up our strong system to work better together, whilst remaining strong themselves. In terms of what success will look like at the next level down, I'll go back to Steph's slide. I think what we would like to see at the end of this is that we have more diverse learning for a more diverse range of learners and indeed researchers, research development opportunities that are more diverse as well. Secondly, that we want more complementarity between learning programs, between further education and higher education, but also between learning and research. So we talk a lot in the document about having a knowledge and skills system, a joined up knowledge and skills system, and the various pieces that go around that. Both of those make absolutely no sense without more joined up links and pathways. And this is probably something that needs more deliberate attention. And I know the Minister talked about it too. Unless there is the seamlessness between the sectors, having very strong sectors doesn't make sense. And that is certainly something we want to build on, that concept of not putting a foot wrong, of not entering one system and finding that you have to go back out the front door and back in again to come into another element of the system. So I think that the pathways and the links will be a critical element of our success. I hope that's sufficient, William. Can elaborate further, but I think that captures the main objectives of what we're trying to.
I think we might have lost Orla there briefly, but in any event, Orla's answer did give me the benefit. Hopefully it addressed Ivan's point. It also gave me the benefit to reflect on an answer to the next question that's popped up from Martin Marjoram in the TUI. Martin's asking the question that during the pandemic, staff demonstrated agility and responsiveness, but were largely excluded from real involvement in decision-making and resources. And he goes on to make the point that current IR processes are the opposite of agile and responsiveness, and a significant drag on progress and active engagement, which we've highlighted obviously this afternoon is vital to the policy. And he also talks in that context about the engagement on funding the future and concerns that are there on the staff representative side in terms of union representation. And Martin's asking what reassurance can be offered that engagement and collaboration will be properly valued. But really good question, and it really highlights the challenge that's there in terms of partnership, and partnership in an environment where resources aren't boundless, aren't limitless, and indeed can often be quite constrained. And the challenge that's there of working in a way, and you know, we saw during COVID, but COVID was an extraordinary occurrence, of working in a way where there is collaboration based on trust and based on engagement and based on dialogue, which is open and candid and real around the challenges that are there and constraints that are there. So notwithstanding that Orla gave me a lot of time to think of a good answer to Martin's question, I don't think I have a brilliant answer, but I do have an answer, which is our understanding that this won't work unless everyone is involved in seeking to support its development in the first instance, where the kind of issues that Martin is highlighting can be articulated and hopefully work through to a better place in our understanding that, you know, there's a proper place for the, you know, conventional, the traditional processes of IR engagement, the IR machinery of the state, you know, the pay negotiations that are going on at the moment. But we miss a trick if that's our default, or if that's our suggested approach to dealing with issues such as significant reform and transformation. And we look at the need for change in the technological sector in terms of realizing the ambition that we have for TUs. We see the ambition that's there in the FET strategy for that sector and for the FET College's future. And we all know, and we collectively know, that the objectives, the goals, the aspirations that we're setting for ourselves, they're just not going to be reached unless we can engage in a constructive way and in an organized way, in a planned way, in looking at the HR transformation that needs to accompany that change. And it's not just HR, because obviously it flows into terms and conditions. So all I can say really in conclusion is keen understanding and awareness that's a significant issue. A strong commitment, I think, on behalf of the department to working in partnership. But you know, not absolutely acknowledging and recognizing that is going to be a significant element of the, you know, constructive challenge involved in working together to the shared objectives that we've set ourselves. So I'll move on then maybe to the next question that we have from Niamh O'Reilly. And Niamh is asking the question, or she makes the point that a unified tertiary education system that centers on inclusion and learners is very welcome. But can we discuss in more detail the theme of balance in terms of the policy? So rather than steal Orla's thunder, I'll hand over to Orla in the first instance, and I might come back with any final points that occur to me. Orla, do you want to come back in?
Niamh, I'm really glad you asked that question, as they always say. I guess we do, I'm trying to figure out what you mean in terms of balance, and maybe what you mean is that there's some kind of deterministic approach to deciding a balance between further education and training, higher education, and research and innovation. William can correct me, but things don't really work in that way at the moment, and we've no real intention to make things work that way, i.e. to kind of determine who goes where. But what we do want is the sectors to work together in more complementary ways. And I think if the sectors are working together in more complementary ways, you've a much better chance of achieving a kind of a healthy balance between the sectors, and especially if the pathways are joined up, then people can make choices based on what they want to learn, how they want to develop, rather than choosing one sector over the other for other reasons. And I think that's what we're trying to get at. The other aspect of balance, I guess, is that idea of diversity and catering for diverse needs. And there are a whole range of aspects to that, if you like. The minister you heard talk about inclusion. We want to ensure our system is as inclusive as possible, and that everyone has the opportunity to meet their own goals, their own motivations, their own aspirations, that there are no artificial barriers, or that people aren't, if you like, artificially channeled into one particular form of learning or the other. I think that's an important part. But another really important part is getting that balance right between a system that can cater for what we know is going to be a growing bulge of people coming out of our secondary school system, but that bulge will subside towards the end of the decade. And we want to look more at how we meet the needs of people who want to learn throughout their lifetime. I know we use the term lifelong learning. I've also heard the term more recently, continuous learning. And I think that's what we want to get, that kind of balance in the system too, so that we're not just doing one thing or the other, or putting all our eggs in one basket, but that we're building a system that can cope for a whole diverse range of contexts and range of learners and researchers, and through that build up resilience and sustainability in our system. I think I'll leave it there, William, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's very clear, and I won't try to add anything to that. Moving on to the next question that we have from Grace Edge in TIA. And Grace is asking, can we say more about plans regarding collaborative funding calls to support the mainstreaming of good practice, which was mentioned in the Spotlight on Actions 22 document? Stephanie, do you want to come in on that?
Thanks, William. Yeah, a good question there from Grace. And indeed, in the Spotlight Actions, we do refer to a proposal for collaborative funding calls to support some mainstreaming of good practice. And it's absolutely correct. Funding will be required, I suppose, to develop some of those funding calls that will support the development, for example, of collaborative programs. And we are working to support colleagues in scoping out the possibility for some fiscal space to achieve this. But we have to recognise that there are demands on the public purse, and they are significant. So I suppose, in addition to the potential for that funding, we also have to look at other ways that we can incentivise the development of programs such as that, and in terms of mainstreaming of good practice. And sometimes, Grace, it's the small steps, it's the baby steps that we can achieve as well. Even sometimes opening the conversations around that mainstream of good practice, getting the right people in the right room from across the sector can be, just as good initial actions, but obviously with keeping an eye to be able to create that fiscal space for funding calls. And that, like I said, that certainly is on the agenda, and we'll do what we can to support our colleagues in that regard, but we have to be aware of the pressures on the purse.
Yeah, I think just to complement what Stephanie has said, we're very keen on making this concept real from the outset by looking at opportunities to build on, work streams that are already underway in terms of facilitating, enabling cooperation, but through the estimates process, which, is just now kicked off, I suppose, and won't come to a conclusion till budget time. See if it's possible to identify resources that will demonstrate that the more unified tertiary system, that it's something that's happening, that's moving forward, that we're testing, that we're using the opportunity, to see what works well, what doesn't work, notwithstanding it might look like a good approach in principle. So there's an action orientation which I think is captured in the Spotlight Actions, which really, I suppose, are, from the department's perspective, set out a kind of agenda where we want to make the concept visible in the next year or 18 months. Next question that's up is from Tara Farrell of the Longford Women's Link. And Tara makes the observation that in response to the comment on pathways, there are existing models of progression between community education and HE providers, and that it would be important that existing practices which already facilitate progression for learners in these settings are not overlooked. And that would be absolutely our intention. It's not our goal for this policy to sort of be inserted into the landscape of further and higher education, adult education, community education, and displace good things that are already happening. It's intended to identify that good practice, build on it, and make it happen more. So I think it's a really important point, and something that we'd be really looking for people to help us with through the consultation process, to point out where this is working, where there is examples of where that kind of concept of not putting a foot wrong are already evident, and how we can scale up those approaches, learn from those approaches, and make sure that they're more mainstream into the future. We're running up to 3:30 at this stage, so I'm going to just see. There's a question from Helen McMahon that has just come in. Helen works as a colleague in Enterprise Ireland, and she's asking, will Enterprise be included as partners in funding calls? And I suppose, just drawing on our work more generally on skills, and as demonstrated by the approach that we've taken in a range of areas, Enterprise is obviously a key partner for all stakeholders in the system. And where we allocate funding, where we're looking for funding to drive change, Enterprise has to be a partner. And obviously we look at different ways that can be achieved. So not sure I'm saying, categorically yes, but I'm saying that we will look for every opportunity to make sure that we're benefiting from the expertise, the experience, and the involvement and participation of Enterprise as we drive forward on this agenda and other agendas, other policy frameworks that the department is working with the system on. At this juncture, I think I'm going to bring things to a close. Just in closing, would like to thank you for your participation this afternoon. Reiterate the point made by Stephanie, and indeed in my own contribution and that of the Minister, that we're looking to work with you. And the first step in doing that is obviously through participation in the consultation process. So I think Stephanie gave out the email address, or sorry, not the email address, the link at which you'll find further information on the consultation. So that's gov.ie/unified system. So if you go there, you'll find the policy platform, you'll find the spotlight actions, and you'll find the consultation paper. So we very much hope that your participation this afternoon, what you've heard, will encourage you to look at that and to engage with that, and to continue to engage with this important work stream as we move it forward with your help, with your assistance, and on the basis of your advice and expertise. So thanks very much for your time this afternoon, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day.